I walked into the boardroom at precisely 9 a.m., still wearing my janitor's uniform, the same navy blue coveralls with Martinez Cleaning Services embroidered on the chest that I'd worn for the past 3 years. The familiar scent of industrial disinfectant clung to my clothes, a smell that had become as much a part of me as my own skin. 27 executives in $1,000 suits turned to stare, their conversations dying mid sentence, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire room. "Excuse me," Patricia Hartwell, my half sister, said from her seat at the head of the mahogany table, her voice dripping with the same condescension I'd heard my entire life. "I think you're in the wrong room. The supply closet is down the hall." I smiled, feeling the weight of the leather portfolio in my hands, the same hands that had scrubbed their toilets, emptied their trash bins, and cleaned up after their champagne-soaked celebrations for 3 long years. "Actually, Patricia, I'm exactly where I need to be." I pulled out the chair directly across from her, the chair reserved for the company's new majority shareholder. Though I suppose I should introduce myself properly this time. I'm Isabella Chen Hartwell, and as of yesterday, I own 63% of Hartwell Industries. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 40 floors below. Patricia's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally settled on a shade of fury I'd seen many times before, usually right before she'd found some new way to make my life miserable. Let me take you back to where this all began, 32 years ago, when my mother, a brilliant Chinese-American engineer named Dr. Lily Chen, made the catastrophic mistake of falling in love with Richard Hartwell, Patricia's father, and the founder of what would become one of the most successful tech companies on the West Coast. My mother was working as a software architect for a small startup when she met Richard at a tech conference in 1991. He was 20 years older, recently divorced, and utterly charmed by her innovative ideas about data compression algorithms. What started as a professional collaboration quickly blossomed into romance, and within 6 months, my mother was pregnant with me. Richard was over the moon. He'd always wanted a son to carry on his legacy, and while I turned out to be a daughter, he seemed genuinely excited about having a child with someone as brilliant as my mother. For those first few months, we were a family. My mother moved into his Marin County mansion, helped him develop the core technology that would make Hartwell Industries a Fortune 500 company, and put her name on 17 different patents that would later be worth hundreds of millions. Then Patricia's mother, Victoria, came back into the picture. I was 6 months old when Victoria Ashworth, Richard's ex-wife and Patricia's mother, decided she wanted her old life back. Victoria came from old San Francisco money, the kind of family that had made their fortune in railroad and shipping when California was still young. Her family's connections had been instrumental in Richard's early success, opening doors that would have remained closed to a middle-class engineer from Ohio. Victoria had left Richard 3 years earlier for a count she'd met in Monaco, taking their 12-year-old daughter, Patricia, with her. But European nobility, as it turned out, was more interested in Victoria's trust fund than her company, and after a series of financial disasters and romantic disappointments, she found herself back in San Francisco, broke and humiliated. Richard, ever the romantic fool, took her back without question, and Victoria, ever the master manipulator, made it clear from day one that there wasn't room in the Hartwell family for both her daughter and Richard's bastard child with the help. That's how Victoria always referred to my mother, as the help. Despite my mother's PhD from MIT, despite her groundbreaking work in computer science, despite the fact that her innovations were making Richard millions, Victoria treated her like a glorified servant who had gotten above her station. The campaign to destroy my mother was subtle at first. Victoria would make little comments about how ethnic women were always trying to trap successful men with pregnancy. She'd schedule important family events when my mother was traveling for work, then act hurt when my mother couldn't attend. She convinced Richard that my mother was being ungrateful when she asked for proper credit on her patents, painting her as greedy and opportunistic. Patricia, who was 13 when I was born, absorbed every ounce of her mother's venom and redirected it toward me. Even as a toddler, I was subjected to her creative cruelties. She'd volunteer to babysit me, then spend the entire time telling me elaborate stories about how my mother was a gold digger who would abandon me the moment she found someone richer. She'd hide my toys, accidentally knock me over, and once, memorably, cut off half my hair while I was sleeping because she thought I was getting too pretty for a mongrel. By the time I turned 5, the psychological warfare had taken its toll on my mother. She was working 18-hour days trying to prove her worth to a man who had already decided she wasn't worth fighting for. Her health began to deteriorate. Stress-induced migraines, insomnia, and a nervous condition that made her hands shake when she was particularly anxious. The final blow came when I was 6. Victoria had convinced Richard that my mother was planning to steal company secrets and start her own competing firm. She'd planted evidence, emails sent from my mother's computer to imaginary competitors, and hired a private investigator to document my mother's suspicious behavior. When Richard confronted my mother with this fabricated evidence, she was so devastated by his lack of trust that she didn't even try to defend herself. She just packed our bags and left. We moved to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Oakland, a world away from the luxury of Marin County. My mother, blacklisted from the tech industry thanks to Richard's influence and Victoria's Whisper campaign, took whatever work she could find. She cleaned offices at night, tutored high school students in math and science, and slowly watched her dreams crumble under the weight of financial necessity. But she never stopped loving me, and she never stopped believing that someday justice would prevail. "Isabella," she would tell me during those lean years, usually while helping me with homework at our secondhand kitchen table. "Remember that talent and intelligence are gifts, but character is a choice. The people who hurt us chose to be cruel because they were afraid that we were better than them, afraid that the world would see their mediocrity next to our excellence. Don't let their fear make you small." My mother died when I was 16, killed by a drunk driver while walking home from her third job of the day. The driver was the son of a prominent San Francisco family, a kid who got probation and community service for ending the life of the most brilliant woman I'd ever known. I spent my last 2 years of high school in foster care, bouncing between homes and somehow managing to graduate valedictorian despite everything. I'd inherited my mother's gift for mathematics and computer science, but more importantly, I'd inherited her unshakable belief that the universe had a way of balancing the scales. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that before she died, my mother had made one final brilliant move. She'd kept detailed records of everything, every patent she'd helped develop, every algorithm she'd designed, every innovation that had made Hartwell Industries successful, and 3 months before her death, she'd finally hired a lawyer and filed suit for proper attribution and compensation. The lawyer, a fierce woman named Margaret Wong, who specialized in intellectual property theft, had taken the case on contingency, believing that my mother's documentation was airtight. The case had been working its way through the courts for 16 years, accumulating interest and damages, while Richard and his family enjoyed the fruits of my mother's stolen genius. And last month, the California Supreme Court had finally ruled in my mother's estate's favor. The judgment was staggering: $847 million in damages, plus 63% ownership of any company that had profited from my mother's stolen intellectual property. Since Hartwell Industries had been built almost entirely on my mother's innovations, that meant I now owned controlling interest in the company that had destroyed my family. But Richard, Patricia, and Victoria didn't know any of this yet. To them, I was still just Isabella Martinez, the quiet janitor who'd been emptying their trash and cleaning their toilets for 3 years. They had no idea that Martinez was the married name I'd taken when I'd briefly been married to a kind man named Carlos, or that I'd been working at their company for 3 years as part of an elaborate plan to document their current operations and ensure they couldn't hide any assets when the judgment came down. Those 3 years had been the most humiliating of my life, but also the most educational. I'd watched them operate, learned their weaknesses, and most importantly, gathered evidence of their continued pattern of abuse and discrimination. I'd seen Patricia sexually harass young male employees, threatening their careers if they didn't accommodate her advances. I'd watched Victoria embezzle money from the company's charitable foundation to fund her gambling addiction. I'd documented Richard's pattern of stealing credit from his employees' innovations, just as he'd stolen credit from my mother decades earlier. And now, sitting in this boardroom wearing my janitor's uniform like armor, I was finally ready to collect what was owed. "I'm sorry," Patricia said, her voice tight with barely controlled rage, "but I think there's been some mistake. Isabella Martinez is our janitorial staff. She's not—" Isabella Chen Hartwell, I corrected, pulling out the court documents and sliding them across the table. And you're right, I have been part of your janitorial staff. It's amazing what people will say and do when they think the help is invisible. Richard, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally found his voice. This is ridiculous, Isabella. I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but the kind that takes 16 years to work its way through the courts, I interrupted, my voice calm and professional, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The kind that involves $847 million in stolen intellectual property and a mother's dying wish for justice. I watched recognition dawn on Richard's face like a slow sunrise. His skin went ashen and his hands began to tremble, the same tremor I remembered my mother developing during those final terrible months in his house. Lily, he whispered. And for a moment I saw the man my mother had fallen in love with, before Victoria had poisoned him, before greed had corrupted him, before he'd chosen comfort over conscience. Dr. Lily Chen, I corrected, my mother. The woman whose innovations built this company, whose patents made you rich, whose genius you stole, and whose memory you tried to destroy. I stood up, my 5'4" frame somehow seeming to fill the enormous room. The woman who spent her last 16 years in poverty while you lived in mansions built on her stolen work. Victoria, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. Now wait just 1 minute, young lady. I don't know what lies your mother told you, but my mother never lied to me, Mrs. Hartwell, but apparently the same can't be said about you. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the room's presentation system. I've spent 3 years working in this building, and I've been very thorough in documenting what I've observed. The first slide that appeared on the massive wall screen was a photograph of Victoria at the Bellagio in Las Vegas, placing a $50,000 bet at a high-stakes poker table. The timestamp showed it was taken 6 weeks ago. This is interesting, I said conversationally, because according to your expense reports, you were attending a charity summit in Denver that week. The charity summit that was funded by the Hartwell Foundation, the same foundation that was supposed to provide scholarships for underprivileged students in STEM fields. The second slide showed bank records, Victoria's personal account receiving regular transfers from the foundation's operating budget. Over the past 3 years, you've embezzled $2.3 million from a charity designed to help students like my mother once was. Students who grew up poor but dreamed of changing the world through science and technology. Victoria's face had gone from pink to red to purple. How did you get access to my personal financial records? This is illegal. This is evidence, I said calmly. Evidence gathered by a private investigator licensed by the state of California, working on behalf of my mother's estate. Everything here was obtained through legal discovery processes. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a series of email exchanges between Patricia and a young software engineer named David Kim. And Patricia, I think the board would be interested to see how you've been conducting yourself with male employees. I began reading aloud. If you want your project to get approved, you'll need to show me how badly you want it. My hotel room tonight, 9 p.m. This was sent to David Kim, age 22, on his 3rd day of employment. Patricia shot to her feet. You can't. This is private communication. This is harassment. Actually, this is harassment, I corrected, clicking through several more slides showing similar messages to different employees. Sexual harassment, abuse of power, and likely several violations of federal employment law. David Kim quit 2 days after receiving this message. So did Michael Chen, James Rodriguez, and 6 other young men who've worked here in the past 2 years. The other board members were beginning to murmur among themselves, some pulling out their phones, others frantically scribbling notes. I could see the calculation in their eyes, the realization that they were witnessing the collapse of a regime they'd all enabled through their silence. But I wasn't done yet. And Richard, I said, my voice softening with a sadness that surprised even me, let's talk about your continuing pattern of intellectual property theft. The next slide showed internal emails between Richard and his development team discussing a new data compression algorithm that one of his engineers, a young woman named Sarah Martinez, no relation, had developed. Sarah spent 8 months developing this algorithm on her own time, using her own resources. It has the potential to revolutionize cloud storage and could be worth hundreds of millions in licensing fees. I clicked to the next slide, which showed Richard's instruction to the legal department. Make sure the patent application lists me as primary inventor. Sarah can be listed as a contributor. That's standard practice, Richard said weakly. As CEO, I oversee all innovations. That's exactly what you said about my mother's work 32 years ago. I cut him off. And it was theft then, just like it's theft now. Sarah Martinez quit last month and filed her own patent application with the help of the same law firm that represented my mother's estate. She'll be fine. But this pattern of behavior, this systematic theft of other people's genius, ends today. I walked around the table, my soft-soled work shoes silent on the thick carpet. 27 of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley watched me with a mixture of fascination and terror, like they were observing a natural disaster in slow motion. I know what you're all thinking, I continued, addressing the room at large. You're wondering how the janitor could possibly have access to all this information. You're wondering if this is legal, if it will hold up in court, if there's some way to make this all go away. I stopped behind Richard's chair, close enough that he could smell the industrial cleaning products that had become my signature scent. Let me answer those questions for you. I have access to this information because for 3 years, I've been invisible to all of you. You've had sensitive conversations in front of me, left confidential documents on your desks while I emptied your trash, conducted illegal business while I cleaned your offices. You never noticed me because people like you never notice people like me. The working class, the immigrants, the women who clean up your messes. I moved to Patricia's side of the table. As for legality, everything I've gathered is completely admissible in court. I was an employee of this company with legitimate access to all public areas. I never hacked any computers, never broke into any files, never violated any confidentiality agreements. I simply kept my eyes open and my mouth shut while you all incriminated yourselves. Finally, I returned to my seat, spreading the court documents across the table like a royal flush. And as for making this go away, that's not going to happen. The California Supreme Court has ruled. The judgment is final. As of yesterday morning, I own controlling interest in Hartwell Industries, along with full voting rights and the authority to make immediate changes to company leadership. I opened my portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Which brings me to my first order of business as the new majority shareholder. Effective immediately, Richard Hartwell is terminated as CEO with cause, forfeiting all severance packages and benefits. The cause being a 30-year pattern of intellectual property theft, beginning with my mother's work and continuing through present day. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You can't. The board has to vote. I own 63% of the company, Richard. I don't need anyone's permission. I slid a document across to him. Your employment agreement includes a clause stating that termination for cause nullifies all golden parachute provisions. You'll need to clear out your office by end of business today. I turned to Patricia next. Patricia Hartwell is terminated as Chief Marketing Officer, effective immediately, also with cause. The cause being sexual harassment of multiple employees, creating a hostile work environment, and bringing disrepute to the company. Patricia's perfectly applied makeup was beginning to run as stress-induced perspiration broke through her foundation. This is insane. You can't just... I absolutely can, and I am. I handed her a termination letter. You'll also need to clear out your office today. Security will escort you from the building. Finally, I turned to Victoria, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the previous exchanges. Victoria Hartwell presents a more interesting case, I said thoughtfully. She's not technically an employee, but she has been embezzling money from the company's charitable foundation. So, while I can't fire her, I can and will be pressing criminal charges. I pulled out my phone and speed-dialed a number I'd memorized weeks ago. Detective Morrison? This is Isabella Chen Hartwell. We spoke about the embezzlement case. Yes, I'm ready to file formal charges. Yes, she's here now. Hartwell Industries boardroom, 40th floor. Thank you. I hung up and smiled at Victoria's stricken face. The police will be here in about 20 minutes. I'd suggest you use that time to call a lawyer. The boardroom had erupted into chaos. Half the board members were on their phones, presumably calling their own lawyers or crisis management firms. The other half were frantically shuffling through the documents I'd distributed, trying to understand the legal implications of what was happening, but I wasn't finished yet, not even close. I know this is a lot to process, I said, raising my voice to be heard over the commotion. So let me lay out what's going to happen next. The room gradually quieted as 24 remaining board members, minus the 3 Hartwells who were no longer part of the company, turned their attention back to me. First, Hartwell Industries will be renamed Chen Hartwell Technologies, acknowledging my mother's foundational contributions to everything this company has achieved. Second, we will be implementing a comprehensive ethics review, starting with a full audit of all patents and innovations developed in the past 30 years. Any employees whose work was misattributed will receive proper credit and retroactive compensation. I clicked to a new slide showing organizational charts. Third, I'm promoting several individuals who have been systematically undervalued and underpromoted due to the previous leadership's discriminatory practices. Sarah Martinez, despite the attempts to steal her algorithm, will be our new Chief Technology Officer. David Kim, who survived Patricia's harassment and stayed with the company, will be our new Head of Software Development. Dr. Amara Okafor, who has been passed over for promotion 6 times, despite having more qualifications than her male colleagues, will be our new Chief Operating Officer. Another slide appeared showing financial projections. Fourth, we will be establishing the Dr. Lily Chen Foundation for Innovation and Technology, funded by a $100 million endowment from company profits. This foundation will provide grants and scholarships for underrepresented students in STEM fields, ensuring that the next generation of brilliant minds won't face the same barriers my mother encountered. I stood up and walked to the massive windows overlooking San Francisco Bay, the same view my mother must have seen during those brief, happy months when she thought she'd found her place in this world. I know some of you are wondering about the future of this company, whether we can survive this transition, whether the disruption will damage our market position. Let me be clear about something. This company's success was never about Richard Hartwell's leadership or Patricia's marketing acumen or Victoria's social connections. This company succeeded because of the innovations my mother created, the talent of the engineers and programmers who actually do the work, and the dedication of employees at every level who believe in technology's power to change the world. I turned back to face the room, and for the first time since I'd walked in, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I'd accomplished. My mother died believing that talent and character would eventually triumph over greed and cruelty. She died believing that the universe had a way of balancing the scales. Today, 32 years after she was driven from this company, 16 years after she was killed by a drunk driver while working 3 jobs to survive, and 3 years after I started cleaning the toilets of the people who destroyed her life, those scales have finally balanced. The sound of sirens was audible now, growing louder as they approached the building. Victoria had gone completely white and was clutching her purse like a life preserver. "The police are here for Victoria," I announced. "Security will escort Richard and Patricia from the building. The rest of you are welcome to stay for the emergency board meeting I'm calling to officially ratify the leadership changes." As if on cue, the boardroom doors opened and 3 police officers entered, followed by building security and a woman I recognized as Detective Sarah Morrison, who had been investigating the foundation embezzlement for the past 6 months. "Mrs. Victoria Hartwell?" Detective Morrison asked, approaching the table. Victoria stood on shaky legs, her aristocratic composure finally cracking completely. "There's been some mistake. I am Victoria Ashworth Hartwell. My family has been in San Francisco society for over a century. I don't—" "Ma'am, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." As Detective Morrison read Victoria her rights, I watched Richard and Patricia's faces cycle through disbelief, rage, and finally, a kind of hollow recognition. They were experiencing the same helplessness my mother had felt 32 years ago. The crushing realization that the people they'd trusted to protect them had instead chosen to destroy them. The difference was that my mother had been innocent. She'd been destroyed for the crime of being brilliant while vulnerable. Richard, Patricia, and Victoria were finally facing consequences for crimes they'd actually committed. Security guards flanked Richard and Patricia as they gathered their personal belongings, or tried to. I'd had their access cards deactivated an hour before the meeting, so they couldn't retrieve anything from their offices without supervision. Isabella? Richard said as the guards prepared to escort him out, his voice carrying a note of desperate pleading I'd never heard before. Your mother, Lily, she wouldn't have wanted this. She was kind. She was forgiving. My mother was brilliant, I corrected, my voice steady and calm. And brilliant people understand the difference between forgiveness and justice. She forgave you years ago, Richard. That's why she was able to die at peace despite everything you'd taken from her. But forgiveness doesn't negate consequences. You stole her life's work, destroyed her career, and drove her into poverty. The fact that she forgave you doesn't mean you get to keep what you stole. As the guards led him toward the door, Richard turned back one last time. She loved me once. Yes, I agreed, she did. And you threw that love away for money and social status and the approval of a woman who never loved anything but her own reflection. That was your choice, Richard. Now you get to live with the consequences. The boardroom fell silent after they left, except for the soft sounds of shuffling papers and nervous breathing. The remaining board members looked like survivors of a natural disaster, trying to assess the damage and figure out how to rebuild. I know this has been overwhelming, I said, my voice gentler now that the primary targets of my revenge had been removed. And I know some of you are probably wondering if you're next, and if there are more revelations coming, if your own positions are secure. I returned to my seat and pulled out a different folder, this one marked with each board member's name. I've had 3 years to observe all of you, to understand how you operate, what your strengths and weaknesses are, how you've contributed to or enabled the toxic culture that's dominated this company. Some of you have been complicit in the abuses I've documented. Others have been simply passive, choosing not to see what was happening because it was easier than confronting it. I began distributing individual folders to each board member. What you'll find in your folders is a comprehensive review of your performance, your ethical conduct, and your value to the company going forward. Some of you will be asked to resign. Others will be given the opportunity to prove that you can be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. James Crawford, the longtime chief financial officer, opened his folder with trembling hands. After a moment, his shoulders sagged with relief. You'll find, James, that your folder contains nothing but praise. You've consistently opposed the financial irregularities, spoken up when decisions seemed unethical, and protected employee interests even when it put you at odds with the previous leadership. You'll be staying on as CFO with a substantial raise and expanded authority. Margaret Foster, the head of human resources, wasn't so fortunate. Margaret, your folder tells a different story. You've systematically ignored sexual harassment complaints, buried discrimination lawsuits, and actively participated in suppressing employee rights. You have until tomorrow morning to submit your resignation, or I'll begin formal termination proceedings. One by one, I went through the room, delivering verdicts that had been 3 years in the making. Some board members would stay, others would go, and a few would be given second chances contingent on immediate behavioral changes. By the time I finished, it was nearly noon. Half the original board had been dismissed, 3 criminal investigations had been initiated, and the remaining executives looked like they'd survived a corporate earthquake. I want to be clear about something, I said as we prepared to adjourn. This isn't about revenge. This is about justice, accountability, and creating the kind of company my mother always believed this could be. A company where innovation is rewarded, where employees are respected, where talent rises regardless of gender, race, or social background. Dr. Amara Okafor, our new chief operating officer, raised her hand tentatively. Miss Chen Hartwell, what's your vision for the company's future? How do we move forward from here? It was a fair question, and one I'd been thinking about for months as this day approached. We're going to do what this company should have been doing all along, I replied. We're going to innovate. We're going to create technology that actually improves people's lives rather than just generating profit. We're going to treat our employees like human beings rather than disposable resources. And we're going to prove that ethical business practices aren't just morally superior. They're more profitable in the long run. I pulled up a final presentation slide, one I'd been saving for the end. I spent 3 years observing this company's operations, and I identified dozens of innovations that were shelved or underdeveloped because they didn't promise immediate returns or because they came from the wrong people. We're going to resurrect those projects, properly fund them, and give credit where credit is due. The slide showed a list of abandoned projects: sustainable computing initiatives, accessibility improvements, open source software development, and educational technology programs. Within 6 months, Chen Hartwell Technologies will become the most innovative and employee-friendly company in Silicon Valley. Within 2 years, we'll be the most profitable, and within 5 years, we'll be the model that every other technology company tries to emulate. Sarah Martinez, our new CTO, leaned forward with interest. What about the data compression algorithm, the one that Richard tried to claim credit for? I smiled. That algorithm is going to be our first major product launch under the new leadership. And Sarah, your name is going to be on every patent, every press release, and every award ceremony. The world is going to know exactly who created it and why it matters. As the meeting finally adjourned, I remained in the boardroom while the others filed out, some still in shock, others energized by the possibilities ahead. Through the massive windows, I could see the San Francisco Bay stretching toward the horizon, dotted with sailboats and cargo ships going about their daily business. My phone buzzed with a text message from Margaret Wong, the lawyer who had fought for my mother's estate for 16 years. Saw the news alerts. How does it feel to finally get justice? I thought about her question as I gathered my papers and prepared to leave the boardroom, the same boardroom where my mother had once presented her innovations to Richard back when she still believed that talent and hard work would be enough to secure her place in the world. How did it feel? It felt like coming home after a very long journey. It felt like the end of a story that had begun before I was born and had shaped every day of my life since. It felt like my mother's dreams had finally found their way back to where they belonged. But mostly, it felt like the beginning. Over the next 6 months, Chen Hartwell Technologies underwent the most dramatic transformation in Silicon Valley history. We went from a company known for aggressive business practices and employee turnover to one celebrated for innovation, ethics, and workplace culture. Sarah Martinez's data compression algorithm launched to international acclaim, revolutionizing cloud storage efficiency and earning her recognition as one of Technology Review's Innovators Under 35. David Kim's software development team created an accessibility suite that made computing more inclusive for users with disabilities, earning the company its first United Nations Technology Award. Dr. Amara Okafor streamlined our operations so effectively that productivity increased by 40% while employee stress levels dropped dramatically. The company's first ever employee satisfaction survey returned results that made industry headlines. 97% of respondents said they were proud to work at Chen Hartwell Technologies. The Dr. Lily Chen Foundation funded its first class of scholarship recipients, 50 brilliant students from underrepresented backgrounds who would have otherwise been unable to pursue degrees in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Each scholarship came with a guarantee of paid internships and potential employment at Chen Hartwell Technologies. Richard Hartwell filed multiple lawsuits trying to overturn the court's decision, but each one was quickly dismissed. His reputation in Silicon Valley was permanently destroyed, and he eventually moved to Arizona, where he worked as a consultant for small technology firms. Patricia Hartwell was charged with sexual harassment and creating a hostile work environment. She settled out of court with 7 former employees and left California entirely, last seen working for a marketing firm in Miami under her maiden name. Victoria Hartwell was convicted of embezzlement and fraud. She served 18 months in minimum security prison and was ordered to pay full restitution to the foundation she'd robbed. Her San Francisco society friends abandoned her completely, and she currently lives in a modest apartment in Fresno, working as a cashier at a grocery store. As for me, I kept my janitor's uniform hanging in my office, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as a symbol of the dignity that exists in all honest work. I wore it occasionally to company events, especially when we were celebrating an employee's promotion or innovation. It served as a reminder to everyone, including myself, that brilliant ideas can come from anywhere, and that the person emptying your trash might be the same person who changes your company's future. The uniform also reminded me of my mother, who had cleaned offices and tutored students, and worked 3 jobs because she believed that no work was beneath her, as long as it allowed her to support her daughter and maintain her dignity. 2 years after that transformative board meeting, Chen Hartwell Technologies was named Company of the Year by three different business publications. Our stock price had tripled, our employee retention rate was the highest in the industry, and we held more patents for socially beneficial technology than any other company our size. But the moment that meant the most to me came on a rainy Thursday in November, when I received a handwritten letter from Maria Santos, one of our first Foundation Scholarship recipients. Maria had grown up in the same Oakland neighborhood where my mother and I had lived after leaving Richard's house. She was a first-generation college student studying computer science at Stanford. "Dear Miss Chen Hartwell," the letter began, "I know you must receive a lot of thank you notes, but I wanted you to know what your foundation has meant to my family. My mother cleans offices at night, just like your mother did. She's worked 3 jobs for as long as I can remember. And she always told me that education was the only thing that could change our family's future. When I got the Dr. Lily Chen Foundation scholarship, my mother cried for 2 hours. Not just because of the money, though that was life-changing, but because someone believed I was worth investing in. Someone who understood our struggle had decided I deserved a chance. I'm going to graduate with my computer science degree next year, and I already have a job offer from Chen Hartwell Technologies. But more than that, I have hope. I have a future. And someday, when I'm successful, I'm going to create opportunities for other girls like me, girls whose mothers clean offices and dream of better lives for their daughters. Thank you for showing me that justice is possible, that hard work and intelligence can triumph over cruelty and greed, and that the universe really does have a way of balancing the scales." I read that letter sitting at my mother's old desk, the one I'd had restored and moved into my office as CEO. The same desk where she'd worked on the innovations that built Hartwell Industries, where she'd filed her final patent applications, where she'd written her last letter to the lawyer who would eventually win her posthumous vindication. And for the first time since this journey began, I allowed myself to fully feel what I'd accomplished. Not just the financial success, not just the corporate transformation, not just the personal satisfaction of seeing my family's destroyers brought to justice. I felt my mother's presence, as real and warm as if she were sitting beside me, finally at peace, knowing that her life's work had been acknowledged. Her daughter was safe and successful, and her dreams of a more just world were becoming reality. The scales at long last were balanced.